Welcome to Section 5 of the BJCP Training Program from the Brewers Anonymous Homebrew Club. This section is all about the BJCP Style Guidelines. These guidelines are going to be part of everything we do in this program. The information in them makes up a huge part of the BJCP exams, and they're used in every BJCP-sanctioned homebrew competition. At least they should be used by the judges in those competitions. I know I use them. This is Lesson 1, and we're going to take a look at what these guidelines are, why they're such an intricate part of homebrew judging, and a little bit of what they aren't to try to clear up some misconceptions about these guidelines. So let's get started. So starting off with some basics of what the guidelines actually are. First and foremost, they are the most important and utilized document in preparing for all of the BJCP exams. Of all the tools we'll be sharing in this program, the BJCP Style Guidelines are the most important and most used in all of the exams. There will be questions pulled from these guidelines on your online entrance exam. The style entries in these guidelines are the basis for your evaluation of each of the 6 beers you'll have to judge in your judging exam. And even though we're not preparing for the written exam in this program, they are an extremely vital part of that exam as well. Maybe even as much as the judging exam, but in a completely different aspect. They are a collection of descriptions of 34 style categories, 122 substyles, and an appendix of 5 additional local styles, also called X styles because they are labeled, or I guess identified as X 1 through 5. You've probably heard me explain in the judging exam in detail lesson that you won't have access to these guidelines during the exam. So these numbers, the 34 styles, and more specifically that 122 substyles, might sound a little daunting at first, having to know information about that many styles. I do have a sliver of good news. The judging exam only pulls beers from categories 1 through 26. So that narrows that field down to 92 substyles to learn. It's still a lot, but at least we're out of 3 digits. And we're going to talk a lot more about that as we get into the style study videos and judging exam-specific lessons. I also want to point out that that substyle number may be higher than you've seen in other places, maybe other courses or other articles online. That's because I'm including all the styles that are also broken out in some substyles. For instance, IPA, category 21. It has 3 numbered substyles. 21B has another list of styles underneath that. For instance, black IPA, brown IPA, red IPA, brewed IPA, and a few more there's actually so many I can't remember off the top of my head. But they don't have their individual 21 and letter designation. Historical also has these as well. I have counted all those styles in this number to give you an exact number of styles described in the style guidelines. They also provide examples of each of those styles, and these examples are not arbitrary. They don't pick up an American Brown Ale off the shelf and cite that as an example just because it says American Brown Ale on the label. There is a good amount of effort into finding beers that best represent each of these style descriptions. These examples help provide a reference for both brewers and judges. Now, the key word in here is reference and not definition. It's because there is no real single perfect to the letter example of each of these styles. Each beer that's cited is an excellent representation of that style, but it would tend to excel in more areas than others. This is why it's important to continue to refer to the guidelines even after you've gone through any kind of style training, be it through a program like this or on your own. These beers, again, are excellent representations of the style, but that doesn't mean the beer you're judging has to be exactly like any of those. Referring to the guidelines, make sure you're giving that beer its fair evaluation. Now, let's talk a little bit about the actual style entries in these guidelines. Each of the style entries is broken down into the following sections. They start with overall impression. They describe aroma, appearance, flavor, mouthfeel. There are some comments on each style, a little bit of the history, some characteristic ingredients specific to that style. There's a bit of a style comparison for each one. Then the vital statistics, and we're talking about original gravity, finishing gravity, SRM, IBU, ABV. We're talking about real statistical numbers here. They cite some commercial examples, and then it ends with tags. And I will say I understand what they're trying to do with the tags. And conceptually, I think they're doing it well. It just functionally doesn't work very well in the guidelines that they provide online. So we're not really going to, and we're not going to explore the tags section of these style guidelines as we move forward. So for the online exam, you could have questions taken from overall impression, aroma, appearance, flavor, mouthfeel, comments history, characteristic ingredients, style comparisons, and vital statistics. Now, that's a lot of information that they can pull many questions from, and that's a big reason, if not the main reason, this exam is open book, particularly in the vital statistics section, because that is a lot of information, mostly numbers, to memorize if you didn't have the book in front of you. So being able to look those up and look them up quickly certainly helps when taking this exam. Now you're probably wondering what's up with these style comparisons being in blue. Now, if you've been watching these lessons in order, you probably remember in the entrance exam and detail lesson, I said there are some style comparison specific questions on the exam. Now I marked this blue because those questions aren't limited to the information in that style comparison section of the entry guidelines. In fact, there's a better chance that those questions will be a direct comparison of two of these specific styles regarding their flavor, aroma, mouthfeel, or vital statistics specifically. But there could be something asked that is found in these sections of each of the style entries. So we want to be familiar with this section and be able to review it quickly come exam time if we need the answer from that part of these guidelines. Now for the judging exam, far less to remember. We're really focusing on aroma, appearance, flavor, and mouthfeel. Now you might be wondering, why is overall impression not highlighted in this when it is a section of the score sheet? This is a different overall impression. The overall impression in the guidelines is kind of the bird's eye view. We're going to start here and work our way down description of the beer. Your overall impression is what you thought of the beer overall, what's good, what's not working, and how to fix it. None of that is in the overall impression section of the style guidelines. So the overall impression for the exam, or at least on the score sheet, I should say, does not relate at all directly to the overall impression sections in these style entries. One big thing to know about these guidelines is that descriptions are specifically worded. Each entry is using the words it uses in its description for a specific purpose. There are absolutes. This beer should have X. This beer should not contain Y. Z is inappropriate for this style, things like that. If the description is making a definitive statement, the character it's referring to should or should not be present in that beer to any degree. Now keep in mind, though, anything going against that statement about that particular singular characteristic doesn't automatically make this beer completely out of style. It just makes it less so, depending on how large the presence or non-presence of that character is. This is obviously going to be a case-by-case style/beer situation. I just wanted to point that out, that a contradiction of one of those elements does not necessarily completely dismiss that beer from style. It also lists, probably more commonly, possibilities. This style can have X. This may have Y. Sometimes it has a strong presence of Z when aged. Things like that as an example. Now, I will say that this is where, in my opinion, for what it's worth, is where things can become troublesome when the guideline entries aren't fully read when judging. And that can be a problem with lazy judging or know-it-all judges or anyone who thinks they know a style so well that they don't have to review it. And we do have a little bit of that problem in our circuit, and I'm guessing that the hobby has this problem in general. It takes, at most, 2 minutes to read an entry, and that's if you're reading really slow. It feels like even less time if you review each style characteristic as you're judging the beer. And the trouble isn't always reading it, though. Really minding and paying attention to those shoulds, inappropriates, mays, optionals, specific words are really important. Too many times, the descriptors are seen and remembered, and what comes before or after them are either missed or worse, ignored. In the case of not reviewing them at all, there could be a small amount of words that you're not remembering that explain something that you're perceiving or not perceiving in the beer. This is why I'm saying it's important to review them no matter how many times you've judged. You want to make sure you're giving that beer the fairest, the most balanced, and the most informed evaluation that you can. Now, are judges going to vary in their interpretation of the use of these words? Absolutely. But they'll be far more consistent when the guidelines are properly reviewed during judging of each style, if not each beer. And in my personal opinion, again, for what it's worth, if that's not being done, the beer isn't being fairly evaluated, and that's on the judge in this case and not the guidelines. All right, that's me getting off my soapbox to get to the next slide. A somewhat common question I've heard during competition season, albeit slightly more colorfully worded when scores don't go so well, is why have style guidelines? One reason is to help foster consistency. When I hand you a Kolsch, you have an expectation of what you're going to be drinking. Same with an IPA, Belgian Quad, whatever the style is, there's that expectation from consistency. Describing and categorization of styles helps build expectations of these beer characteristics and helps narrow in the focus when you're evaluating a beer. Just handing you a beer without any style assigned to it and asking you to evaluate it on aroma, flavor, appearance, and mouthfeel without knowing its intended style is going to be tough, if not impossible. You can describe it, you could even rate it on a personal preference scale, but not having something more specific to judge it towards just wouldn't work very well in our hobby. It also helps identify unique characteristics of styles. IPAs are hop forward. Amber ales are more malt forward. Wee heavies have a rich Maillard character. Light American lagers are light and crushable. These are just many of the unique characteristics, and this is just 4 of those, 122 substyles. It also helps identify unique processes. Czech lagers utilize a decoction mash. Pilsners are boiled for at least 90 minutes. Hazy IPAs are dry hopped. Lagers are, lagered. Now, I think any modern homebrewer know many of these old school, quote, traditional, unquote, processes have been debunked or modernized with advancements in malts, equipment, yeast strains, etc. Just about everything in home brewing is continually improving and things are changing fast, except the BJCP exams. Most, if not all, of their process questions are still rooted in these traditional methods. So while many of us may not use most of them, we need to know them for the exam in relation to these style guidelines. A lesser acknowledged reason and use for the guidelines is that it helps brewers find an appropriate style name for their beers when the intended style doesn't quite match. And I am speaking from experience in this slide. I had an alt beer that was struggling at the start of a competition season. Judges didn't really find anything wrong with it in terms of off flavors or aromas, but it just wasn't matching style. After reviewing the entry for Vienna Lager in that same category, I started to see that it was way more like the things described in the characteristics of the Vienna Lager than in the intended alt beer style. So my mind was stuck on alt beer for a while because that's what it was supposed to be. But when I finally took a step back from that and reconsidered what maybe it is closer to when all's said and done, it made me change the category that I entered it in for the next competition, and I actually got a gold medal for that, surprisingly. And this was a beer that wasn't winning anything prior to that. So it is very good for that, and it's helped a lot of brewers in our club as well when we get together and try to help someone identify a style for beer. Now, I don't think there's going to be any questions relating to this particular use of the guidelines, but I thought it was important to share because if you're judging and you're part of a homebrew club program, you're probably brewing, and it's to me, been a pretty valuable use of these guidelines. These guidelines are continually updated. The last 3 releases of the guidelines probably have been the most significant in terms of what we will be experiencing as beer judges today. The latest one, the 2021, are noted as being a minor revision to the previous versions. There are a lot of existing descriptions that have been enhanced and reworded to kind of pinpoint more specific aspects and clear any kind of misinterpretations up. Some provisional styles have been added now to the categories, and there were a couple of sub-styles that have been moved into different categories. I guess you could call that a reclassification since the last published guidelines. The 2015 style guidelines were a major revision to the 2008. These were nearly a complete rewrite from the beginning to end, and it does not take much research to go and see just how different things are from the 2008 to 2015 version, just at the category level. You're not going to need to know anything from the 2015 and 2008 versions of these guidelines, but I think it is worth taking a little bit of time just to see how different things have changed between those two versions. It's a very different document in terms of its organization, or at least its classifications and categorizations, I should say, between those two, which kind of makes me interested in where it may go as time goes on. They will continue to be updated. 2021 is certainly not the last version we're going to see in beer judging, but they will continue to take years between updates, and there are a couple of very good and sensible reasons why. 1, styles change, as do ingredients, and just like we just discussed a few slides ago, so do processes. An alteration of any of these components isn't going to make it into the guidelines to be a style, a common ingredient, or a process note until it's been refined and practiced for a reasonable amount of time. They don't want to add a hot, specialized style that is big this summer but completely goes away at the end of the year and never seen again. However, having said that, brewed IPA has been added to the 2021 style guidelines, so not everything always goes to plan. The other reason that we've noted in this lesson is one that we, as future exam takers, should collectively be behind, and that is with the BJCP being the sole creators, organizers, and distributors of the beer judge exams. Constant changes to the guidelines would make preparing for these certification exams next to impossible. It would certainly make a program like this just about obsolete the moment that we post it. So while a lot of snide comments are made as the year on the cover continues to grow older, know that there are well thought out reasons behind these long periods between updates. And for us, the exam takers, that's a really good thing. Now a little bit more on what the style guidelines are, and possibly more important, what they aren't. First, they are written primarily for homebrew competitions. Are they used elsewhere? They sure are. But when they are, it's up to the person, group, business, whatever that's using them to be using them properly. If a local brewery makes a green IPA with smoked malt and hot peppers and calls it a Munich Helles, it's not the BJCP Style Guidelines' fault that the Munich Helles style description doesn't match that commercial beer. And I see this a lot, and I'm part of it. I'm with another brewer or club member, and we have a beer that's out of the style that it's called, and the conversation tends to go one of two ways. Usually, if we like the beer, we blame the guidelines for being wrong. If we don't like the beer, we say this beer is out of style. Both of the statements are wrong in that example I gave because the guideline name is clearly being misused. By their own admission, they do not describe every possible beer style. Styles that are pretty hot at the time of this recording, like Mexican lagers, cold IPAs, and triple and quadruple IPAs, weren't hot in 2021. If they're hot in, say, 2026 or 2027, when I expect the guidelines to be updated again, maybe we'll see them. On the other side of that example, grisettes and stick alt beers are about as prevalent now as they were in 2021, which is to say hardly prevalent at all. Hence, not in the style guidelines right now. And in that case, these styles probably won't be in the next guidelines either. Then there's things like seltzers, smoothies, and all kinds of things that either aren't allowed or included in homebrew competitions or just aren't made at the homebrew level, at least not commonly enough to include. They are not intended to inhibit brewers' creativity. Too often, these guidelines are interpreted as having rigid boundaries that can never be pushed or broken. That's simply not the case. It's not the intent of these style descriptions. The BJCP openly acknowledges that brewer creativity drives both the hobby and the industry forward. They're not out to stifle that. This is a complete misconception, mostly voiced from the displeasure of competition results. It's hard to say that, maybe it's even hard to hear that, but it's true. How many times have brewers praised the BJCP guidelines when they scored a 44 versus complaining about them when they score a 24? I'll tell you right now, the former never happens. When they score a 24, it's always the stupid guidelines and the dumb judge's fault. When they score a 44, oh, that's all me. I did that. And that's just one of the harsh realities of judging. I'm not saying that to scare anyone off. I'm just putting it out there because sometime or another, you'll be part of that conversation. I can almost assure that. They're not the 10 Commandments, and that is their words. This is plucked right from the BJCP website. The style guidelines are written to be interpreted with some flexibility, within reason, of course. Having a gold-colored beer that's described as being straw to yellow, but otherwise outstanding, there's some flexibility there. But a brown beer in that same style, well, not so much. So we talked a lot about the style guidelines so far. Where do we get them? Well, they are available online at this link that's on the screen, which I will put in the notes below as well, so you don't have to type out all of that. When you get there, they're available in PDF and Word document format. There are several app options for both iPhone and Android. Just be sure that when you're downloading them, that you're using the style guideline that the competition asked for. I think at this point, 2021 is the version that needs to be used for sanctioned competitions. So you're going to be looking for an app that has the 2021 guidelines in them. There's also a very extremely easy place to find them right now. It's with this video, and the PDF file in the exercise files tab below this lesson will have a copy you can download directly as well. As I wrap up, I have a very literal last word in this lesson. It's very important, I think, to judges and brewers and competitors and anyone in the homebrew hobby, and that last word is interpretation. It's come up quite a few times in this lesson. Nearly everything in these guidelines that you are going to be used in your judging is going to be guided by your interpretation of what's written. There are some straightforward statements. Should not be sweet. Grassy flavor is inappropriate. There's not so much interpretation to these statements, but the phrase lightly bready malt. What's your interpretation of lightly, or even bready for that matter? Is it 100% exactly the same as mine? It's doubtful. There's also ranges. Moderate to moderately high roast could be a phrase. Same question. What's your interpretation of either? Is it the same as mine? Is it the same as 2, 3, 4 other judges? Again, they are going to vary. This is a part of the reason that you're going to hear brewers say, this beer got best of show last month and this month no medal. It's not the sole reason why. There are many facets to that. Age, conditioning, packaging, how the beers were handled. But the difference in judge interpretations does factor a little bit into this entire equation. I'm not saying this to intimidate anyone out of judging, not in the least. I wouldn't be doing this program if I didn't want to recruit as many judges as we possibly could. I'm sharing this as a huge aspect of judging that nearly everyone forgets, entrants and judges alike. A random selection of judges may have a very similar interpretation of things, but they will never match exactly. And that's fine, and frankly a good thing. Beer is not a straightforward, sterile, boring, cut and dry, black and white thing. It's diverse, rich in history, rich in creativity, and ever-changing. If there's a single right answer in judging and only one way to interpret every style in these guidelines, all beers would be exactly the same in each of those styles, and competitions would be mind-numbingly boring. We're all learning, and until you work and earn that master judge rank, you and every other judge will always have more to learn. And you will learn the more you judge, and you'll also adjust as things change. Homebrewing is a great hobby. Judging homebrew competitions is not only a crucial piece of this hobby, but it's also an incredibly fun piece as well. So, on that note, we're done with this lesson, and we're going to go on to lesson 2 and take a look at the guidelines directly.